Hi, and welcome back. I'm John Dawson. A couple weeks after I retired, I was standing in the kitchen with a cup of coffee, staring out the window, and I realized I had absolutely nowhere to be. No meeting to prep for, no email thread waiting on me, no quiet pressure humming in the background. And instead of feeling pure relief, I felt slightly unsettled. I looked at the clock and I tried to figure out what day it was. Tuesday? Wednesday? I genuinely didn't know. For most of my adult life, time had shape. Meetings structured my days. Projects structured my weeks. Then performance cycles, they structured my year. There was always something pulling me forward, and then, suddenly, there wasn't. The first month felt wider than expected. Wide in a way that was almost disorienting. I would wander through a morning without clear direction. Not sad, not lost, just unanchored. It turns out that when no one else is dictating your schedule, you have to learn how to listen to your own internal compass. And that muscle is weaker than you think after decades of external structure. Then around the same time, something else crept in. Guilt. It's hard to explain without sounding ungrateful. We made smart decisions. Not early in life, not perfectly, but enough to give us options by 50. And when you're around peers who are still working, still grinding, and still waking up to alarm clocks, there's a strange tension. When someone asks you, "So what are you up to these days?" And then there's a pause. Because, what do you say? I went for a walk. I'm writing. I'm booking travel. I mean, none of that carries the same social shorthand as a title. And for years, when someone asked what I did, I had an answer that fit neatly into a sentence. It signaled competence. It signaled contribution. It gave people context. Now, there isn't a clean label. Without that title, you're left with yourself, your character, your presence, the way you show up in a conversation, and that's it. And that's more vulnerable than I expected. There was grief too, even though I chose to step away. My career wasn't accidental. It was built over decades. Long hours, hard seasons, real wins, real losses. And walking away from that felt a little like finishing a championship game where you win. But the locker room is quiet afterwards. There's pride, there's relief, and there's this undercurrent of sadness because you know that chapter is closed. You can't go back onto that field the same way again. And then some relationships shifted more than I thought they would. Most colleagues faded. And that surprised me. Because when you've built something alongside people for years, you assume that the bond will continue naturally. But in reality, most work friendships are tied to context. You remove the context and the connection softens. A few endured, and I'm grateful for those friends. But I had to accept that most of those relationships belonged to that season. My marriage changed too, actually for the better. More time together. More long walks in the middle of a weekday and more spontaneous travel. We set ambitious travel goals together, and we're about to hit them. 100 countries, 7 continents. And that part has been richer than I could possibly imagine. But even in the richness, there were moments where I felt untethered. Who am I now without the job? Work had quietly shaped my weeks. It gave me momentum. It gave me relevance. It gave me measurable output. And then, without the structure, I had to rediscover what pulls me forward. Oddly enough, I started thinking about being a kid. I remember riding my BMX bike through the neighborhood with nowhere to be, no destination, just roaming. And I used to intentionally try to get lost. I would take turn after turn until I had no idea where I was. And there was something thrilling about that. I know it was kind of weird. Like it wasn't panic, it wasn't fear, just the quiet question, can I find my way home? And I always could after a while. I love the process of figuring it out. Backtracking, reorienting, noticing landmarks, trusting my instincts. That was freedom when I was a kid. Hours would pass without a plan. No calendar, no urgency, just movement and curiosity. See, retirement has some of that same texture. Only now, the freedom is mine to manage. What anchors me now is that same curiosity. If something sparks interest, I follow it. Writing, building new projects, exploring ideas. If the interest fades, I let it go. That feels spontaneous, sometimes even chaotic. But there's a quiet thrill in listening to that inner pull instead of an external demand. Retirement has also exposed parts of me I didn't expect to see so clearly. I'll still catch myself getting impatient in traffic. And then I'll laugh because I'm not actually in a hurry. That urgency is just leftover wiring. When we travel and plan shift, flights get canceled, I feel that old need to control outcomes. And then I'll remember, I have flexibility. Why am I gripping so tightly? Those reactions just tell me I'm just still unwinding from years of constant forward pressure. The hardest part emotionally hasn't been boredom, it's been identity. For decades, being productive was intertwined with being valuable. Being needed felt like being important. And when that framework disappears, you have to rebuild meaning in a quieter way. But here's what's been better than I expected: the peace. There's a background hum of stress that exists in your working life, even when you love your job. Something's always pending, something's always coming. And when that hum fades, you don't notice it immediately. But then one morning, you're drinking coffee, and you realize your mind isn't racing again. It's just here. Coffee, it tastes different without urgency. Walks feel different when they're not squeezed between obligations. Conversations, they go deeper when you're not mentally tracking the next task. And then there's aging. Aging feels different too. When you step away from work, you notice how quickly the next generation steps into the roles you once held. Time feels more visible. Seasons feel more distant. Strangely, I've also noticed that my passion for the work I once poured myself into has softened. Not because it wasn't meaningful, but because life moves. If I had to sum it up, I would sum it up like this. Nobody tells you that retirement will also feel like being a child again. Wide open days, curiosity without agenda, and moments of wandering. Except this time, you have perspective. And it's that combination. Freedom without wisdom, that's something I didn't expect. If this resonates, I'd love to hear what surprised you emotionally about retirement. And if you're enjoying these conversations, consider subscribing. I'm building this slowly and honestly. As always, thank you for tuning in to John Dawson Retirement.